Good day all and welcome to today's executive panel. Over the next 25 minutes, we'll be discussing the past, present and future of green finance with two extremely influential leaders in the space. Joining us first of all, we have Alderman William Russell. William took office as the 692nd Lord Mayor of the City of London in November 2019 and was just re-elected for a second term. He is the head of the City of London Corporation and acts as a global ambassador for the UK's world-class financial and professional services sector. William, welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're also very extremely excited to be joined by Ian Sim. Ian is the founder and CEO of Impax Asset Management. Founded in 1998, Impax is an investment manager with over £20 billion in assets under management, specialising in opportunities arising from the transition to a more sustainable economy. Ian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Okay, so thanks again both for joining us. We've got a packed agenda and this is certainly a very exciting topic to be talking about. So allow me to kick off the conversation. And I think first of all, I've got to come to William, Lord Mayor, because in the introduction there, I introduced you as the 692nd Lord Mayor of the City of London, which is incredible and a position steeped in history. We would love an introduction there to the history and the position.
Absolutely. So yes, the mayoralty dates back to 1189, and I am the 692nd Lord Mayor. And the role of the Lord Mayor has obviously changed over the centuries, but essentially the Lord Mayor is all about trade. And I'm the ambassador for financial and professional services for the whole of the UK that employs 2.3 million people. So in normal times, I would travel 100 days of the year to over 30 different countries, promoting financial and professional services, which is very topical at the moment because with Brexit and all that, it happens to be 7% of the total output of the UK. And that's something which is a very important part of what we have here. So that's my role. I've been doing a lot of Zoom calls like this. Today, I was on a virtual trip to the Gulf, and I'm on a virtual trip I was on a virtual trip to China as well. So a lot of it's been virtual, but fun enough, I've reached more people probably as Lord Mayor under COVID than I would have done in normal times. So look, it's a huge privilege, and I'm very excited about this green agenda and I call myself a green Lord Mayor, and it's now the green brick road to COP26, not the yellow brick road.
Absolutely. Thanks, William. Very, very interesting. So maybe let me kick off with my first question in relation to green finance in particular. And this question is directed to Ian. Now, Ian, you set up Impax over 20 years ago when financing with a sustainability lens was relatively new and untested. Can you walk us through sort of your thought process when setting up the company and some of maybe the challenges and the investment philosophy in general?
Yes, well, actually, my journey goes back 10 years prior to that, to the late 1980s, when I was graduating in physics and didn't quite know what to do with my life. And I'd read a book called Our Common Future, which coined the phrase sustainable development. It was a UN initiative chaired by the Norwegian Prime Minister, the so-called Brundtland Report, after Gro Harlem Brundtland. And she laid out a very compelling vision and also potential apocalypse for the planet, given the pace of population growth and the rate of resource consumption. And so the idea of sustainable development was trying to see whether we could end up with a society that was more suited to living on the planet over the long term without destroying it. And so for the first 10 years, between 1988 and 1998, I was trying to find out how to have a career in this new area of sustainable development. And after a few years, I latched onto the idea that the money was the key to solving the problem, and very quickly that the private sector had the most money compared to, say, the government. So the idea of Impax Asset Management, which I started, as you said, in 1998, was really to act on the interface between the private sector's money, pension funds, savings from individuals, insurance companies, etc., sovereign wealth funds, and the solution of environmental problems as proposed and rolled out by private companies. So ever since the start of Impax Asset Management just over 2 decades ago, we've been looking for the world's leading companies that are solving environmental problems and buying stakes in them and managing those stakes over the long term to create value for the people that are providing us with the money, which are those pension plans and savers around the world.
So it almost is the idea that companies who are acting in a sustainable way or working towards building a new sustainable economy, they're likely to be more successful potentially in the future? Is that sort of how the story goes to attract the investment into Impax?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's sort of obvious when you think about it that with the world population approaching 8 billion people, demanding higher and higher standards of living, crowding into cities, there's more and more pressure being put on scarce environmental and natural resources. And the solutions to those problems is coming through the application of new technology, new business models, new policies from governments are helping to shape market solutions. And those companies on average are growing more rapidly than the mainstream economy. And this is a long-term trend. It makes a huge amount of sense to have an investment manager that's specialized in this area, dedicated to understanding these companies. The markets are very complicated, lots of change. And so we're really we found our feet over a couple of decades in being the interpreters of these opportunities. So it's high growth, high rates of investment return.
And William, I know this is obviously a very important topic for you and your remit with the City of London Corporation. I mean, how are you going about sort of continuing to pull big finance to adopt sustainable investment practices? What are you doing, for instance, in the City of London?
So, we're doing quite a lot. I mean, we started something called the Green Finance Institute, which is helping, which we set up with government, and it's coming out with various ideas and research products about the future and how that finance can be engaged. We hosted just a month ago the Green Horizon Summit, which attracted over 90 different countries, something like 9 million Twitter feeds, or on 9 million things on Twitter, and then and had I mean 30,000 people had registered to take part in it. So and I co-hosted that with myself and Mark Carney, and you know, as Ian knows, this is a massive opportunity for the UK and for the city to be known as the green finance centre of the world. Ian was there a long time before most of the other asset managers, and they're all playing catch up. And well done, Ian. But I just think that, you know, great opportunity. We have the Impact Investing Institute, and we have everyone buying in to the fact that this is an opportunity for the city to be the green finance centre. I mean, during the Green Horizon Summit, the Chancellor came out and said that the government would issue a green gilt, and then we had humanitarian signing up to TCFD by 2025. We'd like it to be a bit sooner than that, and I'm sure most people will sign up before then. So lots of good things coming out of the city, and we can influence the world in this, as Ian's company has as well. And I think it's very exciting. But we've got this, you know, this road to COP26, and we're hoping that at COP26 we can create a green finance pavilion throughout the 2 weeks as it goes on for, and have different sectors of what they can do to encourage investment in the sustainable space and get to where we need to get to by 2050.
And you mentioned COP26 there, William. I mean, presumably there'll be lobbying and potentially policy discussed at COP26. And presumably policy has a large impact on the development of sustainable investment, green finance in general. Perhaps Ian or William, you'd like to comment on the role of policy?
Well, I'll let Ian go on that one.
Yes, I mean, look, I think, as I mentioned before, many of the exciting areas that we're investing in have some kind of policy shaping opportunities. So be it quotas for renewable energy or market rules around trading distributed energy from, say, solar panels on your roof, rules around automotive emissions limits, which shape the sale of vehicles, rules around water abstraction, rules around recycling rates. These are all usually without subsidy. They're market design interventions. And so it's absolutely critical, if we're going to reach some of these environmental targets like net zero, that governments around the world do what they can to shape appropriate market solutions so the private sector can come in and provide the goods and services to get to the goals. Now, what's really important in the context of net zero and the 2050 targets is that governments around the world, and I know the UK is leading the way in this, work out what we need to do sector by sector to get to net zero. So Impax and a number of other investment managers are calling for more clarity around what we call a sector roadmap. So how do we take the vehicle markets forward? How do we shape our power and energy markets over the next 30 years? What do we do about materials? What do we do about food? So companies, investors, banks, and government need to collaborate to lay out these sector roadmaps. If we do that in a smart way, there can be minimal amount of subsidy and maximum amount of value creation, maximum amount of jobs, and for many countries, huge export potential as well.
I mean, I'll just add to that. You look at the fintech sector, and one of the reasons why fintech's been so successful here in the UK, as you know, is around the regulatory environment. So regulation is going to be really important as we define what the green world that we're trying to get into. So I see that as very important. And then the other thing is, as we go around policy, we need government to come together with private initiatives. So, you know, when I travel the world and speak to sovereign wealth funds, they're very keen to invest in a lot of these green projects. And you know about the National Infrastructure Bank that's being created. We don't know how that's going to, what that's going to entail, but that was another positive. But the sovereign wealth funds want to invest alongside public, because it can't be just the private sector spending the large sums of money on taking us to where we want to get to around zero emissions. So that's another bit that I think is going to be very important.
And I think policy seems to be often changing quite quickly. And thinking of that from an investment perspective, presumably that can have an impact on your investment philosophy, Ian. I mean, is that a risk of policy suddenly changing, or do you just have to sort of guide the strategy with potential policy changes?
Well, I think if you add up all the policy changes across the environmental landscape, it does look as though things are changing very frequently. But fortunately, in any one particular area, the policy changes are relatively infrequent. So in the European arena, for example, we typically have got 10-year roadmaps with policy not changing materially over that decade. In the vehicle area in the United States, policy typically is set 10, 12 years out. So the manufacturers have got time to adapt. I think if you've got a 10-year goal or a 12-year goal or a 15-year goal, it's perfectly possible for the private sector to retool, to reposition its marketing, to start to bring consumers with you. What we don't want is lurches from one policy mix to another. Fortunately, that doesn't happen very often. Now, in the context of investing in these environmental goods and services, then there's a huge amount of value to be created by investment managers in anticipating the next move of policy. And that's certainly one of the things that we try very hard to work on, is just expecting when is policy going to shift, positioning the assets ahead of those policy changes, and then hopefully when values readjust, we can make some money.
Absolutely. And I mean,
I've got a question for Ian. Is that all right, Kieran? So Ian, at Impact, I mean, a lot of your investments, I presume, are in the public markets. How does it break down public versus, you know, that VC stage and that private equity stage, where there must be huge opportunities as well in that space?
Yes, sure. Well, we've been investing in both areas really since the outset. Our very first fund was a private equity fund investing in the solar energy sector, and we've had private equity investments now for over 20 years. There's also the middle piece, which is quite often overlooked, which is early stage companies that are already listed. And I think that's where a huge amount of value can be created. So you're typically getting businesses that have got revenues. Sometimes they're just about profitable. They've gone public to raise some growth capital. They're not very well covered, and a specialist investment manager like ourselves can go in there, uncover them, find the gems, the hidden gems, take a position, and then help them to grow. So it's like sort of three areas rather than the traditional two.
And I mean, Ian, maybe if you could highlight some of the areas that sort of you're looking to allocate more capital to over the next 5 years. Are there particular areas of green finance or particular geographies, for instance?
Well, look, I think we're at a really exciting stage in this 30-year transformation towards net zero. We're in the foothills of a complete revolution in the way that we get about. So the rapid rise of electric vehicles, I think, is now well understood. We've also got the potential for fuel cell transportation, for compressed natural gas across the whole transportation fleet. Longer term, hydrogen and ammonia technologies could well help us decarbonize shipping, and maybe, who knows, aviation as well. So that's the first one. The second one would be energy or power in particular. So we've seen the rise of wind farms and solar projects around the world. But you can't have unlimited growth in wind and solar. You need some additional services to balance the load, to smooth the supply. And so we're seeing rapid growth of opportunities in batteries, in other types of storage. Liquid air is a great UK initiative up in the northwest of England, and also interconnections. So big high capacity pipes to connect grids. And then a third area I would call out would be in the food space. So to get to net zero, we're going to have to change the way we eat, to move away from high greenhouse gas emissions sectors like red meat in particular. And so there's some really interesting companies now providing sort of meat substitutes, and also companies that are providing the agricultural products like enzymes for animal stock to reduce methane emissions. I could go on, but those are just 3 examples.
I was also actually looking at some of your financial results, and I saw an interesting, very innovative product called the gender lens strategy as well. I saw that Impax were involved in. It'd be great to mention a word on that.
Yes, I think it's well established now in the scientific academic community that more diverse teams produce better decisions for reasons that I think are now pretty well understood. And our team in the United States, which been part of the firm now for many years, has been a pioneer in understanding how greater female representation, a number of women's on boards and the leadership of management teams can help strengthen decision making and lead to better corporate outcomes. So what we call gender lens investing is really running portfolios sort of companies in that space. So companies that have got higher representation of women on boards and senior management teams. And I think we've demonstrated pretty conclusively that those sorts of companies on average do outperform.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, from Plug and Play, we work with a broad range of corporations from around the world, which fall into a whole range of different industries. Now, on this call, there's likely to be audiences from a whole range of different industries who are not necessarily part of the financial services. Now, perhaps you could shed some light on how trends within green finance might actually affect their business. Perhaps you've got some trends there that you might be able to share.
So, I mean, I'm happy to start, and then Ian can jump in. I mean, I think what's happening is that, in fact, there's a very good charity, which Ian will know, called Make My Money Matter, run by Richard Curtis, who did 4 weddings and a funeral. Well, he set it up, it's not run by him. And what they did was they went around to the younger generation who have got money, or anyone actually who's got money in a pension, and said, do you know where your money is invested? And they had no idea that they were in, some certain fossil fuel companies, tobacco companies, whatever. And I think there is this huge change now where you as a business have to seriously look at the green, the ESG bit before you invest. So if you talk to the private equity firms like, the KKRs of the world, they now have, this is their number 1 priority, because if they invest in a business that doesn't have the various sustainability and ESG rules that we're looking at, then they're never going to be able to sell that business onto anyone else, or even list it, because the buyers aren't going to be there. And what's happening is I know an asset manager here, not a sustainable one like the one that Ian has, who refuses to own ExxonMobil or Chevron because they aren't doing enough to transition to the green and the sustainability that the world is asking for. And that's where there's a lot of power coming from investors to force companies to make these changes. So all I would say is that even though you may not be in the green area, be aware of it, because to be frank, you won't get the investment, because those are the questions being asked by private equity, VCs and asset managers, and they just simply won't invest in you if you aren't on top of the green game.
Yeah, so maybe let me add to that, and I would certainly point to 3 things which will become absolutely mainstream over the next 5 years, if they're not mainstream in some areas already. The first of which is transparency, and I think we're finding from the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, as picked up by regulators, that governments are now expecting companies and investment managers to disclose risk and to do that in a more and more sophisticated fashion. So we're going to see a lot more transparency. The sunshine will be shining everywhere. Secondly is stewardship and engagement. I think it's no longer possible in the investment community to just buy shares and then close your eyes. As William says, you have to understand what you're buying. And I think there's huge opportunity to be responsible, long-term critical friends to the companies whose shares you own, to engage with the management teams, to point out what they might consider to improve how they're running the business. And the third area, I think, is impact and the measurement and reporting of impact. So this is something that Impax Asset Management has pioneered for almost 7 years now, is gathering data around the non-financial results that companies are having, how much water they use, how much their carbon footprint, what kind of materials consumption they're representing. And so the reporting of the data from portfolios around environmental impact and social impact is starting to become a real sort of calling card for responsible investment managers.
And Ian,
add on to, sorry, Kieran.
And after you, William.
No, I'm just going to add, I mean, another point is what's happening. We have something in the city called Heart of the City that goes and helps SMEs on the CSR space. And now they're going to help them on the green area because, you know, the big companies are able to well, afford and also can move probably in some cases faster. But the SMEs, I mean, coming back to Ian's point, it may be, you know, how much water they're using in their office or what employees, you know, are doing to make their area, their company more sustainable. And it may be just 10 or 15 employees, but it's now across the spectrum. And it's not just the big corporates, it's everyone. And you know, from that perspective, it's very exciting. I came across a company just the other day who, that's what they do. They advise SMEs on how can they make themselves more efficient and sustainable as a business and what they're doing. And we've come across some great companies which, you know, the one I came across the other day, and I'm not an investor in it, so I always make that very clear, is a company called Ocean Bottle. An ocean bottle takes all the plastic out of the sea and makes bottles out of that plastic. And so you have that ocean bottle. I've got one somewhere here that I happen to have, but they've been going for a while, set up by a couple of young entrepreneurs. And, you know, it's exciting. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of ocean bottles out there, so to speak, or companies similar, but that's what's happening. And there's a whole young generation looking at social purpose, looking at what they can do to basically save the world.
Absolutely. And I mean, Plug and Play actually does a lot of work in the areas of waste and plastic waste in particular, working on behalf of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, where they've sort of 50 of the world's largest corporations have put $1.5 billion together to invest in the latest innovations that could alleviate this type of problem. And that maybe brings me on to the next piece, which is, I mean, what role does technology, new innovation technology, have to play here? I mean, we just touched upon ESG, environmental, social governance, and presumably, Ian, new innovations, new technologies coming from startups can support these mid-cap companies as well as the global corporations to actually help manage that.
Yes, I think it's been demonstrated now over the last half a century that technology is right at the heart of the solution to these problems, going back to the 1970s and the oil crisis on a couple of occasions, which shows the start really of the race to produce solar panels and other forms of renewable energy. So right from the start of this conversation, technology has been absolutely essential. Where does that technology come from? Well, I think as you know better than I, it comes from all over the landscape. It comes from universities, from spin-outs from universities. It comes from startups which have maybe partnered with tech initiators, engineers, and then all the way through to large multinational companies. So yes, I think it's a very complex landscape. But if we look, for example, at the hydrogen economy, there's going to be a need globally to develop and adopt at scale a huge number of new technologies electrolysis to produce so-called green hydrogen from renewable energy in the first place, the storage, compression, transportation of hydrogen safely, perhaps blending with natural gas for a while, the change to appliances to take a blend of methane and hydrogen, or ultimately pure hydrogen, and then all sorts of new engine or energy converters, hydrogen-based proton electron membrane fuel cells, for example, or internal combustion engine adaptation to take hydrogen. It's a long conversation to explain all that in detail, but technology is right at the heart of this transformation, and small companies, startups have an enormous role to play, either by themselves or in partnership with larger distributors.
So I would just add one thing to that, and it's data. I know it's a cliche, but data's the new oil. It's the phrase we're all hearing, and it's true. And technology, I put data in there. So a lot of the big company, if you have the data to work out what's going on in the ESG space when it comes to investing in companies, that's going to be very important. And on the recent trips I've been on, Refinitiv have been with me. These are virtual trips. But, they've talked about it, and I know the huge sums of money that is coming around data, and it's going to be incredibly important part of this, of the green world. And, there's a reason why, London Stock Exchange are merging with Refinitiv, and you saw the news on S&P Global merging with IHS Markit. And, I'm sure that Ian's company is a client of probably all of those for the data that he needs to be able to make some of the investments his firm makes.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're on the topic of, the importance of new innovations and technologies, William, how, especially in the City of London, of course, lots of big buildings, lots of employees, especially given COVID and other political things going on, how will the City of London continue to attract sort of the best innovators, the greatest minds from around the world into the city?
Apart from the fact, and no offense to anyone who's watching this webinar, London's the greatest city in the world to live in. We have a culture and history and a heritage that makes it such a wonderful place to live. So if you start off on that premise, you're going to attract a lot of talent to the city. But we also have an ecosystem here in London, and you know a bit about it, with whether it's now the green sector, the ecosystem of the rule of law, whether we have fintech, insurance sector, it's an incredible maritime. I always mention, everyone forgets maritime, but they're very big. So we have an incredible ecosystem that attracts that talent, as well as a wonderful place to live. And in Ian's world, we are the second largest asset manager in the world after our friends in America. Now, there's going to be a bit more competition around the green agenda with Joe Biden, because which is all good news for those of us who care passionately about climate change. But suddenly our American friends will start to focus a bit more on that, even though that may be from Washington's angle rather than others, because I can assure you a lot of the big American companies are already focused on it. But I think with Biden maybe bringing America back into the Paris Agreement, there's lots of exciting things going on. But London has that ecosystem, and I think it will stay. And you haven't even mentioned the Brexit word, but whenever this goes out, we'll probably know whether we've got a deal or haven't got a deal. But I'm always asked what effect's that going to have on the financial sector. And I said we prefer a deal, but a lot of the financial sector is ready for no deal if it happens, and will continue to hopefully do well and thrive like we have done for centuries. We've been innovating for the last 500 or 600 years. So you mentioned history at the start, Kieran. That will continue.
And it's interesting that you mentioned some US politics there in the mix. And Ian, presumably that could be a positive for your business in 2021.
Yes, I think we're seeing three very significant positives for our sector going into the new year. As you say, the new presidency from January 2021. Joe Biden's already announced many intentions in the green space, not just rejoining the Paris Agreement on the first day of office. Secondly, actually further east or out to the east in China, there's a new 5-year plan about to be announced. There will be another big component to sustainable development in that, and that's very exciting for all our Asian investments. We have an office in Hong Kong and have done for 13 years, so they'll be looking at the details of that. And then, of course, as William said, William said at the start, the run up to COP26 in nearly 12 months from now is going to be a very long but exciting runway with lots of announcements about climate change commitments. So yeah, we're very excited about the prospects for next year.
Well, I think we've pretty much running out of time. So I'd just like to take this opportunity once again to thank you both, William, Lord Russell, and Ian. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. And I think it's fairly obvious that there is a transition to sort of a sustainable economy, and it's certainly likely to be a really interesting year next year.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Kieran.